She saw the commotion going on in the office, so she had to come over and say hello.
All right.
You have a beautiful dog. You both have beautiful dogs.
Yeah, I may get interrupted by the dogs. That's part of being outside.
I was sort of hoping that would happen.
You can come out, sweetheart. If she comes out, though, the phone will go flying. I'll get mugged.
Who's outside? Is it Cindy?
Not yet. She's looking at. I have here.
Oh God, she's too cute.
It's one of those magnet curtains.
Yep.
So she hasn't quite figured out whether or not she can walk through it.
Well, I was reading that adoptions are up right now because of COVID. More people are getting dogs and pets right now.
Yeah, I have actually heard of shelters being empty. Isn't that wonderful?
It is.
Like, what a crazy upside.
Yeah.
That's a good silver lining.
Yeah. People are like, I'm home, may as well foster a dog.
Yeah.
So
I mean, as long as they're accounting for their schedule if we ever go back to something more regular, that'd be my only concerns. I hope they don't all fill up when we go back to some sense of normal again, and everyone's like, "Oh, wait, my dog's got to be alone for 8 hours. I can't do this." So,
and that yes, that may happen.
I hope not. I think it's wonderful. I think this is one silver lining here. People are starting to realize, like, oh, maybe everything I need is around me with my family and my loved ones. And maybe if I'm missing something here, I can cultivate this at home rather than, blindly striving out in the world for it.
Totally. I don't know if you saw, but I was doing a thumbs up. So we just went live, and I wanted to first just thank everybody for joining us. And this is our first Facebook Live event called Ask an Outdoor Expert. So I'll be asking questions of our two experts, who I'll introduce in just a moment. And please send in any comments or questions that you have throughout the event in our comment box on any outdoor topics. Just again, to get started, thank you again for everybody who's coming in to the chat. My name is Olivia Bernard. I work for Catskills Center at the Catskills Visitor Center in Mount Tremper. That's a place where we provide information and resources to visitors of the Catskill Park and the surrounding region on things to do outdoors, places to visit, and cultural and historical activities that you can do in the Catskills. While this hour on Facebook is about hiking and outdoor experiences, right now we're just encouraging everyone to please follow state and CDC recommendations to recreate locally. Practicing social distancing, wearing masks, giving people 6 feet of minimum distance. And maybe a silver lining of this is that you find a local park, a rail trail, or an outdoor place that you never knew was right in your own neighborhood. That's just my brief intro. Today, we're really excited to have two people with us here on Facebook Live with many years of outdoor experience between them. We have Heather Rolland and Dave DiCerbo. Heather, who is waving, and Dave. Heather, to introduce Heather, was the president of the Catskill 3500 Club, a hiking club that leads people up the 35 peaks in the Catskills that are above 3,500 feet. She was featured as one of the stewards in Catskill Center's publication called Natural Resources, 50 Stewards of the Catskills. And she also recently authored a book called Asking a Lot, Life with Dogs on Bramley Mountain. Heather, I read recently that you hiked all 35 peaks of the Catskills in a ball gown for charity. That is no small feat. That's really cool.
I'll never live that down.
Very cool. And Dave DiCerbo founded the guiding company called Destination Backcountry Adventures and has served as head licensed guide. He and his group of experienced licensed guides offer hiking, backpacking, fishing, and paddling trips, among other great excursions all over New York State, with offerings in the Catskills and in the Adirondacks. Just to kick us off, this question is for both Heather and Dave. How did you both come into your love of the outdoors? And has the outdoors always been part of your life, or did it happen more gradually?
Dave, you go ahead.
You want me first? Okay.
You first.
So my family, it was my great-great-grandfather who got a tiny little parcel of land in Margaretville. So even though I was raised in Connecticut, all of my memories of summer and joy and peace were always on this tiny little postage stamp up on Swart Road on Margaretville Mountain. I went to college. I did a corporate thing for a few years, and in my late 20s, I really started to get back into backpacking a lot. Just the idea of being outdoors. It was part of being an adult and needing to blow off stress and a little escapism. And I think, like a lot of people, the Catskill 3500 Club was my access to the outdoors. I started climbing these mountains, and then somebody said, you should keep track because you'll get a patch. I'm like, oh, that sounds pretty cool. And it was a very interesting access point for me because, to be honest, I was a bit of like, I don't know if I was your typical like aggro peak bagger, but for me it was always about like get to the top of the mountain, very type A, like I must summit this, I must, achieve this. And I guess after about 2 or 3 years of hiking like that, my natural curiosity started to get the better of me. Why does a rock look like that here, but not here? Why do I see this tree in this place, but never over here? So I picked up a handful of field guides just to sort of get more. And I always joked that, at the time I was wearing a suit and tie, and you could basically like flip a timer, because the minute I started to get into the ecology aspect of things, it was basically like a timer on how much longer I could stand working in a suit and tie and not out where my real passion is. And I had no intention of becoming an outdoor guide, to be completely upfront and honest. When I left my corporate job, I would have thought that it would be much more likely for me to have gone into like environmental education, some formal stewardship. And I started guiding almost for fun, just because friends wanted to go hiking. And then friends, oh, would you take me as well? And then it was a friend of a friend. And then I said, I should start charging. And I said, well, if I'm going to do that, I need a license by the state, and sort of off to the races from there.
Cool.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that.
Absolutely.
So my experience is a little different. I'm like neurotic. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay.
Yeah.
You'll tell me if there's a problem. So I think there are two things that make my experience and like sort of how I became who I am now with my relationship to nature and the outdoors and hiking. Two things that I think were really innate. One, I think I popped out of the womb with a love for animals that just, some people have it, some people don't, and I like, how little tiny kids have imaginary friends? I had an imaginary camel. I just was born connected to, fascinated by, and drawn to animals in a way that, is extreme. And the other thing is that I am a reader, and I'm old. So I was a little kid in the 1970s, and there was no internet, and there was, I know it's hard to believe, there was limited TV, there was limited access to movies or videos. It was limited. So if you wanted to know stuff, you had to read. So when I was 5, my dad died, and my mom went back to work full time, and I was left alone a lot. And it was great because I could read Ranger Rick magazine, and then I could go outside in my backyard. And I started about a quarter mile from my house at a local pond, and I would go and I would sit on the banks of the pond, and I would try to be as silent and as still as possible so that everything would just come back to life around me, everything that I had scared. And there were turtles and muskrats and bird life and all kinds of things. And little by little, as I got older and bolder, I would walk farther and farther away from my house until I was hiking on the Long Trail. Where I grew up, I was very geographically close to the Long Trail. So I was hiking. I didn't know it had a name. I didn't know what I was doing had a name. I just was compelled to go to be in nature and to try and, it was all about trying to see animals. I just wanted to see animals. I would read, and then I would try and go see what I had read about and learn about it firsthand.
That's wonderful. So it sounds like both of you were first introduced to the outdoors largely in this region, which is great. And the other question I wanted to ask is, with the limitation of our outdoor access right now and how far we're really supposed to be traveling, what has been some of the most surprisingly enjoyable ways that you've spent time outdoors? What have been some of the most enjoyable ways that you've spent time outdoors lately?
I'll dive in. So
Thanks.
Two things. Bird watching, for sure. I have found bird watching is something you can do absolutely anywhere. Literally indoors, looking out the window, or going out into your neighborhood, into your backyard, onto your fire escape. I mean, no matter where you are, bird watching is incredibly accessible, and you can participate in that in absolutely any level. You can be a bird watcher without any equipment or any knowledge, and just enjoy seeing and asking questions of your friends and your family. And that was how I got into it. When I was a little kid, it was just, Mommy, what's that? And I would learn birds, and that stayed with me. And I am finding this spring, absolutely, it's really kicked up, to a new gear in terms of enjoying and learning about birds. The other thing I will say is, for me, this spring has been a lot like my earliest days of exploring, which is that, I start from my home and just walk. And if I feel like going a little ways, I go a little ways. And if I feel like going farther, I go farther. But I am, once again, there's no getting in the car. There's no driving to a destination. I'm here, and that's really been cool for me to, some days, I don't go very far at all. I don't leave my property. I just, check out the weeds that are growing in between the paving stones, kind of thing.
Very cool.
Totally.
Similar for me, actually. We're an opposite end of the Catskills. You're far western, I'm far eastern. So I've been using this time to explore everything between the Hudson River and the escarpment. Normally, when it's time to go outdoors, it's just like, all right, well, let's get up on the escarpment and the property as soon as possible. And the last few months, I've been exploring that in-between stuff, everything from some of the local walkable stuff right here in the village of Catskill, down to, Dutchman's Landing, not so much, but there's the Ram's Horn Preserve. So it's different, and it's entirely different ecosystems. And I always love seeing how dramatically an ecosystem will change. To be standing, in Ram's Horn and seeing certain things growing, and knowing that just 7-8 miles as a crow flies, you've got two entirely different ecosystems. And I think that, as guides, I always remind myself and emphasize to our staff that our role is as ambassadors. And really, the more we can build up our knowledge base, be like, oh, I don't normally look at this low elevation stuff because everyone's in such a rush to get to the top of the peak. It's nice to have a little more knowledge. I mean, even not from a professional aspect, but just one of those things like, oh yeah, I see this plant growing here all the time, and I never see it once I'm in the mountains proper. Well, it doesn't grow above 2,000 feet. So small things like this. But yeah, it's learning that an outdoor experience doesn't need to be this big epic adventure. It can be something that's very small and intimate. I'm reading a great book about mosses right now, and the author consistently comes back to remember a question of scale. If you want to, you can spend an entire day exploring the moss on one rock if you just get yourself down to that level. Don't look at it as, her analogy is looking at moss from human distance is like looking at humans from an airplane distance. So the idea of like changing your perspective and understanding that it doesn't need to be the huge views and the big peaks. That, if you can go macro, you can really expand just what's right in front of you.
Totally, and that's a good perspective. And I think I want to find out what the title of that moss book is.
Oh, it's amazing. It's called Gathering Moss. The author is amazing. What's that?
No, that just sounds really good. That sounds really
It's
interesting.
fantastic. She's a really fascinating author. I'm remiss that I can't remember it. The book's in the other room right now. But she's a Native American and also a scientist. So I always have been very drawn to people with a foot in two different worlds, and that's the epitome of it. So it's all of the ancient lore and the instinctive understanding that's been passed down from people who have lived in harmony with nature, and then the entire idea of like, well, let's apply science to this as well, and finding out how frequently the two just sync up so nicely that very rarely they're at loggerheads. And her perspective is really fascinating. There's so many. I have been using this a lot of times. I'll show up a few of my favorite trees of New York by Santiago. This is one that I've been taking on my walks. Eastern forests is another great one. So like, the individual components, but then how to look at an entire ecosystem. What's the difference between a mixed hardwood and a spruce fir forest? What are some of the conditions from climate to elevation to soil? So yeah, it's been a great time for field guides. My wildflowers field guide. There's been a lot of time for that. I think what we've been stressing to a lot of our hikers that are saying that they feel very disconnected from the outdoors right now, we've encouraged them to take this time. That's why I have all the books right here. We're putting together a reading list so that you can have a greater understanding of the ecosystem you're in once you're back in it. It's people say, oh, how do you find those things on the ground? I said, because you train for them. I haven't always been this way. Nobody has. You train yourself to do that. And taking this downtime, I've been doing this for over a decade, and I still read these field guides. I never knew that. That's so amazing. You find a particular bit of symbiosis or something like that. And I know that even when I'm able to get back out there again, I'll have more to offer as an ambassador, a lesson to be learned from nature about how the mosses grow on the rocks and why, this is a terrible thing and this is a great thing, and sort of some of the lessons we can take from nature to find more peace and solace in our lives.
I think you both have kind of touched on this a little bit already, but during difficult times especially, why do you think people are so drawn to nature and to the outdoors?
Because things make more sense out there. When the human is going crazy, you go back there and, everything that you're saying right now, there's no foundation for ground. Like all the routine is destroyed. And Jessica, my wife, who was in here briefly, she was joking the other day that she's done with looking at the calendar. She's going to decide what day to decide which flowers are in bloom. So she said, a couple weeks ago it was spring beauty time. Now it's trillium time. I don't know what day of the week it is or what month it is, but now the trillium are up. And seeing that regularity, like just seeing that, things may be going crazy everywhere else, but you come to this place and look, there's an order that transcends human nature, humanity. So.
Yeah. I was thinking similarly. I was thinking, when I go out for a walk these days, early spring, I see, the trees are budding and the flowers are coming up, and every day it's different. And at the same time, all that was covered by snow all winter is now revealed, and it's kind of grisly. There's a lot of death too. What's that in the dog's mouth? Oh, that's a scapula. Okay. There's life and death are being played out, at any moment. If you go out in the woods, sort of everywhere you look, everything you see is kind of epic. It's life and death, it's the fullness of bloom and its senescence. It's both. And I think that there is something kind of, at least for me, maybe there's a relief in that. Like, this is huge. It's bigger than me. And yeah, I take peace and solace in that.
And I think that too, looking around, going out, and we always talk about going out with intention. What's our intention in the woods? Is it to achieve something, tangible? Is it the idea to reconnect to the woods? Whatever the case might be. And I was walking around on the escarpment at reasonably low elevation, and I saw this birch tree that had been snapped. It was on an exposed ridge, and you could just see a huge trunk all the way around, but the crown had been snapped repeatedly. And I looked at this tree, my first thought was, oh my God, this tree has gone through so much trauma in its lifetime. Look at how many times the trunk has been broken and it had to shoot up suckers and runners again. This tree has suffered so much in its lifetime, it faced so much adversity. And then I looked around and I went, wow, this is the only birch tree around here, and it's towering over the landscape. And it was at the highest elevation you typically see birch trees before you get the switch over to spruce fir. And I thought to myself, well, yeah, one way of looking at this is that this tree has undergone so much trauma and it's had such a difficult life, being situated in this weird notch and it's having its branches broken. But then I thought, or you could look at it and say, this tree has persevered in the face of really difficult challenges. And look where it is now. Here it is in its later stage of life. It's starting to get the older bark on it. And you look at it and you go, this tree is now dominant over this landscape. It's fought to be in that position, and it's gone through tons of adversity, but look where it all is in the end. So I think if you're looking for, balance, the idea of like life and death goes on, we have to remember that, or, that things get destroyed and then come back. The idea that not every bit of adversity is necessarily bad, that it can also strengthen organisms as well. And then I thought about the fact that that tree, and I went, it's not even just this tree. I'm thinking about this tree, but in reality, the tree is anchored to rocks. There are all these different things living on the roots that are helping with nitrogen fixing. And I thought, it's not just this tree did this. This tree did this as part of a forest community. And then it got me to thinking about, the individual struggle and then community. So I think if you're looking, there's lessons that can bring out the optimist in anyone.
Very true.
Definitely true. There's some great symbolism and that we can learn from nature, and I've had similar experiences in the outdoors. It can be humbling, which is sometimes a really healthy thing. We had a couple of questions come in, so I'm just going to take a quick look here at the comments. So Ken Myatt wrote in, I don't see as many animals as I anticipated while hiking the 3500s. I do see more in the Western Catskills, though. But on Twin, I saw dozens of garter snakes. Is that common?
I would say, sort of one of the things about seeing wildlife is that there are so many variables involved. And it can be as simple as they're there, but, for whatever reason that day you didn't see them. I think that there's specifically about garter snakes on Twin. One thing I would say is I always thought I was seeing garter snakes until I learned about the DK's brown snake. So yes, garters are very common, and they're probably garters, but double check for a checkerboard pattern on the back. Looks almost identical to a garter, but that the back scales are more like a checkerboardy, and those are DK's brown. And my best guess, we'll see if Dave agrees with me, my very best guess about why you would see a real increase of garters in one place on one day would be the weather conditions that day. You're getting a good reptile day, whether it's dry or warm or sun or mating or for whatever reason. I would say it's that there's a specific weather condition that has brought them out, and that's why you're seeing them.
Yep. And I would add to that too, something that you said earlier about sitting next to a pond and letting everything settle from your disturbance. Very rarely do you see animals when you're hiking because we're loud and we stink, and the animals are really aware of our presence before we're aware of theirs. And that's something that I always do. Like when we get to camp, I tell everyone, let's try and be as still and as quiet as we can for 10 or 15 minutes and just listen. You'll probably hear the birds come back first. You'll hear the switch from like the chirping alarm call of like large mammal in the area, large mammal, to, back to their normal bird song and communicating. You wait a little bit longer, you might start to hear small mammals rustling around the forest floor again, things like that. But yeah, I would say I very rarely see animals when I'm hiking, unless I surprise them. Like on 2 different occasions, I've been downwind and I've been mutually startled by a black bear on trail because neither one of us was aware of the other because of the scent. But yeah, I mean, I like seeing animals a lot too. That wasn't my initial motivations like Heather, but I would say, Ken, if you want to see more animals, pick a nice, quiet spot, remain as still and as quiet as you can for a while, and probably have a better chance. I think the Western Catskills have more animals, but that's just opinion. I don't think that's based on any empirical fact. I see more animals in the Western Catskills.
When I was driving to the lobby day in Albany, I crossed Ulster County very early in the morning. And let me tell you, I saw more white-tailed deer than I have seen anywhere in the Western Catskills in Ulster County. Holy cow. And Ulster County is full of black bear, right?
Yeah.
You guys have heaps of black bear.
Oh, yeah.
So I think, there's like perception versus reality. You don't notice the ones that you see a lot. I don't see white-tailed deer very often. I mean, they're here. They're dead. It's what you see. I believe I see black bear more than I see white-tailed deer. And that's great. And trust me, there are many more white-tailed deer. I see more indication of fox in the winter when I can track better, more than any other animal. I've never seen a fox. I've never actually seen a fox, but I've seen their tracks enough to know, and through trail cams, I know they're here. I know there are lots, but never seen one. They're shy.
Yes.
I've seen fisher.
Ooh,
I think
nice.
there are more fisher in Ulster County than there are out here. We could use some fisher. We're overrun with porcupines.
I was going to say, porcupines, you got to do. My first fisher experience, this is way back, I think maybe last millennium. I was camping at Alder Lake. It's my first time camping at Alder Lake, and it was before they took the old mansion down, so it just looked beyond terrifying. Oh, yeah. And I still camped along the sides of the lake, and I said, this is going to be such an awesome, peaceful night. And then I heard a fisher cat, and I had no idea what I was doing at the time, and I was terrified. I literally just picked up camp and I went, you know what? There's a lean-to about 2 miles up the hill. I think I'm going to head up there. I'm pretty sure this lake is haunted. I just kept going. So, yeah.
It is an otherworldly cry. And foxes can make some pretty unbelievable sounds, and bobcats too.
Yeah, and in the height of like cicada season, cicadas can also make like a very scary, like almost a yelling woman kind of sound. But I've actually I don't think I've ever heard a fisher call. That must have been really cool, really spooky.
It sounds like a woman screaming, right?
The credit I'll give, and I have to give it to Will Soder, he describes it as a woman who's being pushed off a cliff, screaming and laughing simultaneously, that there's a Doppler effect to it. And it sounds like insane laughter and screaming is the easiest way I could put it.
Yep.
All right, folks, the Catskills are haunted.
Well, on that topic,
that note,
I do believe there are areas where there is some interesting energy in the land. I've had a few experiences in various places that I've just felt this is more than I can explain. I don't need to explain it. I just need to know that something feels distinctly different here.
Yeah. I was hiking from Slide to Cornell, and there was a moment just walking along the trail, and there was that moment where suddenly it was palpably different. And I turned to one of my hiking companions and I said, "Did you feel that?" And he looked delighted and he said, "Yes, I did. I felt it." It was a sense for me. It was, I don't think it was a haunting. I think it was more just an awareness of a change in ecosystem, but it was palpable. It was a sense of profound age. It was suddenly I felt I am in the presence of ancient beings. And then I went and looked it up. I'm like, oh, so Cornell is actually one of the few places in the Catskills where there really is some very old growth.
Yes.
I don't know if it's like literal old growth, but there are areas that were not logged. They were too inaccessible to be logged. And
wow.
Something that I picked up at the Catskill Visitor Center.
I was going to say, Michael Kudish's book is...
There's nothing better than Kudish's book. And he even has, I don't know if I can show it clearly, but he's got on the map, he actually indicates all of the areas where there's still old growth forest. Yes. So you can see the dark green areas, that's all virgin forest. And most of it is higher elevation, like between Slide and Cornell, when you've gotten up into the spruce fir forest and there were no hemlocks, so nothing was harvested for tan marking. But there are spots, particularly in the Western Catskills, where you've got some old growth forest that's still in the mixed hardwood forest. The headwaters of one particular well-known river out in the Western Catskills. You hike back there, elevation is about 2,500 feet, and there are maples back there like this, and birds like this around. And that's, I really believe that, it's funny because I think we almost take it for granted that we even have the opportunity to hike an old growth forest, virgin forest. There's a lot of it in the Catskills compared to most of the places in the country. You get out to some of the Western parks, unless they were specifically protected, they were logged dramatically. So here in the Catskills, there are a couple of corners, and I really always feel like in the presence of something ancient, the minute you said that, I might got chills, Heather. Yep, ancient. That's exactly what I would say.
Yeah, it's special.
Well, it's a little bit of an investment, but it's a terrific book, The Catskill Forest by Mike Kudish. It tells you so much about first and second growth forest. It's a really great resource.
Oh, and the history of everything. If you've ever hiked a trail and you go, why is that weird wall there? You can go back and reference, there was a tan barking operation there, or there was a mill. So getting that combination of, human history and natural history is, big fan of mine. It's a great book.
Mm.
Going back to the questions that I have here, let's see. So this is a question for Heather. You recently wrote a memoir that our viewers can find for sale online called Asking a Lot, Life with Dogs on Bramley Mountain. I was just hoping that you could talk a little bit about it and describe how the idea for the book came about.
Sure. So I used to live in Ulster County. I'm about to be interrupted by one of the dogs. I can feel that coming on. She's sitting 2 feet away from me, looking at me and making all these little sub vocalizations of like, I don't know what you're doing, but it looks kind of like I need to participate. So she may wind up on my lap. I don't know. We'll see. Oh, good girl. Good girl. She just settled. So I used to live in Ulster County, and then through complicated human shenanigans, my husband and I moved to Delaware County, and that was 7 years ago. And just about from the moment we moved in, we moved into what we called a one-room shack, and then my husband would immediately say, and a shack would resent the comparison. We moved in, and I started really what had been a whole new life. And it's a lot like what folks are going through now with the experience of lockdown and all the restrictions. I stopped working. I didn't have a job. And because I didn't have a job and I wasn't making money, I wasn't going anywhere. Can you see her? She says hi. And because I wasn't going, and I was really trying to live an extremely frugal and limited experience up here on the mountain with these 5 dogs in a one-room shack. And what does one do when stuck with no money? That first year, I traded my car for all the doors and windows that we used to build our house. So I had no money, no car, no job, 5 dogs, and lived on a mountain. So what I did was every day we would explore. And those explorations, the dogs and I wandering on my own property and then the adjacent public land, grew into, I'd go out and I'd have these rambles and adventures, and there's the fissure in the hollow tree, and there were all kinds of things. You have to read the book. All kinds of things happen. And then I would come home and write about it. And the writing was really therapy. It was everything. It was creativity. It was art, but it was also, the certain amount of scientific, like, okay, let me put this together. Let me understand what I'm seeing. Oh no, we got another dog. We're visited by another dog. Hey, sweetie. Sorry, that distracted me. And then putting it all together and realizing that there is in some way, there's something useful about this for others to read. It's not only just my own personal diary, but there's something useful about learning how to be out in nature with dogs and kind of being as peaceful as possible.
Well, that sounds wonderful. If you guys have a chance to check it out, Heather's new book is called Asking a Lot, Life with Dogs on Bramley Mountain. And Dave, I wanted to ask a question of you too, specifically a fishing question. You posted some videos on Destination Backcountry Adventures YouTube channel recently that are about fishing for brook trout in the Catskills waters. Really great videos. If you guys have a chance to check it out on YouTube, I would definitely look at it. Can you talk a little bit about your experience fishing in the Catskills and how people who are new to the sport can get started?
Sure. I think the one thing that I would definitely caution right after that, and I truly believe this way, it's a privilege to fish for brook trout in the Catskills. We are incredibly fortunate that we still have native strain of brook trout inhabiting these waters. In so many other parts of the country, the acidification that happened in the atmosphere in the 60s, it was well before that, where development and resource extraction had seriously threatened the habitat of mountain trout, typically brook trout. They like cold, clear water. And so they're a little finicky. And yet, despite the stress that the Catskills were put under through tan barking and development, and then later acidification of the water in the atmosphere, the brook trout survived. Brook trout are in less than 3% of their original range in New York State. So if you're fortunate enough to be able to fish for brook trout, it truly is a privilege, and it's a real connection to the history, I want to say just geological, but it's more than that, the actual natural history of the region. So it's really fascinating. So I'd recommend, for starters, anyone who's interested in getting into fishing, I wouldn't recommend starting with brook trout. They're wild fish for starters, which means that they are incredibly wary. Right, so these are fish that are used to dodging natural predators. So it's very unlikely that someone who's getting into fishing for the first time would be able to approach a brook quietly and silently enough not to spook the brook trout. So what I'd recommend is further down in a lot of the rivers, there are great fishing clubs, and there's a lot of great information out there. The DEC does a very good job of encouraging responsible angling, and I would recommend starting with some of the areas that have stocked waters in them. When you're dealing with stocked fish, there's a little bit different in terms of your intention, whether you're harvesting or not. I will note that I almost never harvest brook trout. I'm not saying I've never done it, but it's a very rare occasion. And it's actually, to me, it's a very big deal to be taking something that has a lineage that goes back to essentially when the glaciers melted 14,000 years ago. So for anyone, a big part of the fun for fishing can be the idea of catching. And, the other thing, too, if you saw the videos, you saw how I very delicately make sure that my hands are wet in order to keep the fish in the water to release so that that takes a little more practice. The brook trout are a little more delicate. If you're fishing further downstream with stock fish, I'm not saying you can manhandle a rainbow or a brown trout, but they're a little more forgiving with that. But I'd encourage any of the different. Trout Unlimited is a wonderful organization. They do a great job of balancing conservation with recreation. So Trout Unlimited, I'd give them, an unreserved shout out and somewhere to start. And I think, a great place is, local fishing stores, places like that. Talk to people, find out. And again, there's a responsibility that comes with it. There are special considerations that anglers need to take, particularly if they're using their gear in one body of water and then coming to another. But those things, doing it the right way shouldn't put people off of what can be a very rewarding, and I think done the right way, anglers and hunters can offer conservation, but often it doesn't go that direction. So an organization like Trout Unlimited that would be super responsible. The DEC does a ton of free fishing days. They point people to places where you can do this as a beginner, do it responsibly, and usually people are very happy to share advice. I know that when people come to me with fishing questions, I don't treat that as like, oh, knowledge is power, I must guard my secrets. The idea is that you're sharing knowledge, you're sharing the right way to do things. And look, I've made tons of mistakes. That's something I always emphasize to people as a guide. Don't let the fear of doing something wrong put you off of it, but make sure that you're constantly learning how to do things the right way. The guide that I am now, I'd probably have some stern words for the Dave that was in the woods 20 years ago. But the idea is the more knowledge people tend to get, the more of an effective steward you'll be. But yeah, as far as starting out for fishing, Trout Unlimited would be a great one. Check out the DECs, the free angler days. They make it to the point where you can try the sport without buying a license. I know at the Catskill Visitor Center, you guys have some rods to loan there just to go to the Esopus, and that's a great thing.
Totally.
Just being a fishing person will certainly give you a very acute appreciation for how important clean water is for all of us.
And I really appreciated in the videos that you posted that you do show that appreciation for the trout. And, I think you say in the video, one of the videos, that you wouldn't have let the fish touch the ground if it wasn't something you were planning on harvesting. So the whole video really showed that appreciation, and I thought that was great.
Yeah. And just for the record on that, so that one was at the very beginning of this current crisis that we're in, and there was a thought of, I would like to responsibly potentially harvest something. So in that video, that's actually a brown trout. Yeah, it's one. I'm a little bit further downstream. I'm technically outside of the blue line on that one, and it's a wild brown, which means they become wild. They were stocked and then they become naturalized. But those are ones that are significantly more prolific. They tolerate warmer temperatures, so it's not such a small stretch of river where they live. So the browns are pretty much out. They're not quite as tasty as the brook trout, but they're still pretty good. But yeah, it is. Just to emphasize, it really is. In terms of starting fishing, I think a great way to start out is for largemouth bass fishing. Largemouth bass will forgive a lot from an amateur fisherman. They'll forgive a foul hooking because they have large mouths. They can tolerate being out of the water for a few minutes. Not that I encourage that, but that would be a great one. One location that I'd encourage strongly, just outside of Kingston, it's I think it's called Peach Lake. We call it Spooky Lake because it's a very spooky looking lake. And it's in the Bluestone Wild Forest. And that's filled with panfish, sunnies, perch, bass, all things that can be very good for someone who's learning the ropes to sort of get an idea of how to handle their tackle, how to handle their catch, things like that. Small things that make a difference. I have hanging behind me a special net that's made of a material that I use when I have trout so that it doesn't damage their skin. Largemouth bass, not a consideration. So there's small things, just, there's always, in the same way that someone who is getting into hiking, you wouldn't encourage them to start out on the tallest peaks because of the potential that they might do damage to either the ecosystem themselves. Same thing with someone who's looking to get started in fishing, and that's what I'd recommend. And the DEC does a great job of pointing people in the right direction for that.
Hey, Dave.
Yes.
I have largemouth bass and perch in my pond here, and some of them are really big. And I look at them and I'm like, dude, I can't eat you. They're like my friends. They're like the other pets,
Yep. No, if they're residents, it's true. There was one pond that I used to fish in Connecticut, and I caught the same fish. I caught some of the same fish over again because I recognized it heals. There's a little hook mark in the cartilage, and it'll heal over. And after a while, I went, well, now I feel like I know you guys. I can't catch
Yeah.
It looked like we got a question that came in from Carla Rhodes about where the best place in the Catskills to view porcupines might be. Heather, I think this might be a great question for you.
Yeah, my driveway. My house, they're all here. I have so many porcupines, and I have 5 dogs, and I have so many porcupines that I am not joking. I am not exaggerating. One of them literally lives a few steps away from my front door. And so I have a trail cam trained on their den area so that I can time when I take the dogs in and out so that I don't literally the other morning I was like, made sure Major disaster. I have 5 dogs fly out the front door. They desperately have to pee. They've been inside 10 hours. You know, it's 6 o'clock in the morning, and they're nose to nose with Persephone, because of course I named her, because we have so many porcupines, and we have their residents. So, truly. So what I've found, so I'll give you like a decent answer. What I have found is that they do seem to be fairly evenly distributed throughout the Catskills. When I lived in Ulster County, we did see them, and that was quite a bit. I'm at about 2,200 feet elevation, and we have heaps of them here. The density of porcupines here in the Western Catskills at this elevation is uncanny. I've never seen density like this, but I will say, I mean, I've seen them on Overlook Mountain. I've seen them where we lived over in Olive Bridge. I've seen them crossing the road all over the place. So they are very widely distributed. I've seen them in Sullivan County. What to look for, especially winter or early spring, is look for trees that have been debarked. Look for trees that have a lot of either spotty, like bits, or long branches that have all the bark has been eaten. And you're near a porcupine if you see that. So then, and you know what I always tell people when they're hiking is look up. The porcupines do like to be in trees. They don't necessarily sleep in trees. They don't den in trees, although sometimes they do. Sometimes they will spend the night in a tree, but often they'll den somewhere, fallen log. You know, the one in my driveway lives in the soffit of an A-frame. They like rock ledges. They like to be under something. They like to kind of get in and away and tucked in. But they will go up into a tree and hang out in a tree. And sometimes they do sleep all day in a tree. So look up.
And I find porcupine scat to be the most fascinating scat of all the animals in the woods. The first time I saw a porcupine scat, and this is a long time ago, I remember exactly where it was. It was in the Biscuit Brook lean-to. And I went in there and I went, why does it look like there are wooden cheese doodles all over the floor of the place? And I literally could not for the life of me figure it out. And then, of course, it was one of those ones I went back and I looked into my books and I went, oh, porcupines, apparently their scat looks a lot like wooden cheese doodles. And when you think about their forage, I guess it makes sense. But
yes. I went and stole a bunch of very old porcupine scat from a huge old den and put it in my garden. I thought it would make good mulch because it's basically digested wood pulp.
Right. You've broken down all the starches and everything like that. Interesting.
Yeah. And there, but you know, so here's an interesting scat question, or scat notice is grouse, ruffed grouse. Their scat looks a lot like porcupine scat, only it's got the bird. Oh my goodness, the white stuff.
Yeah.
What's it called?
I can't remember the name. You know, the white stuff. Yeah.
Olivia, come on, you know this.
My internet connection got interrupted actually, so I didn't get the full
all right
question.
I'm having a senior moment.
I think Dave is Googling it.
I am. It's nitrogen. It's got to be like a uric acid compound or something like that. You go.
I just said urea is what I said. That was the word I was looking for. All right, so there we go. I have had a senior moment and couldn't remember a word on live Facebook.
I gotta be honest. I think even the youngest of people are having them as their brains adjust to quarantine. Like I've had these like my mind's not working very well. I haven't been out of the house today. That's why I need to go actually move and expand this as much as anything else.
Yeah, need to shake the cobwebs up. So yeah, what I had said was ruffed grouse scat looks quite similar to porcupine scat. However, the grouse does have the urea, so you do see the white bits.
Cool. I did not know that. You have a great Facebook group. I think you manage it, Heather. It's like Catskills Tracks and Traces,
yes,
where people submit photos, and then you can identify whether it's what kind of mammal or
Yes.
what animal left those tracks.
Very knowledgeable people in that group who are wonderful at sharing what they know about tracking and about the wildlife tracks. Yeah, the group is more active in the winter, of course, but yeah, it's a great group. The only kind of restriction on that group is it is Catskills only. So if you post stuff from other areas, I do ask you to take it down. And, we don't do fundraisers and no spam and all that crap.
Let me see. We only have a little bit left.
Wow.
I want to ask you guys, please try to ask one more question here. Let's see. Do you guys want to talk about gear or do you want to talk about Leave No Trace? Let's talk about Leave No Trace for a minute. So for anyone who isn't familiar with Leave No Trace is a collection of outdoor ethics, 7 principles in particular that we should all follow when we are recreating outdoors. Heather and Dave, what are some of the most personally important principles for you of Leave No Trace?
I prefer, Heather, you answered most of this. What I want to just very quickly is just tell a very short story about one of my first experiences with Leave No Trace. It's something that I've tried to take with me as I've become more experienced. Leave No Trace is vitally important. It's a philosophy that basically gives people of any skill level the framework to understand how their behavior can impact the environment around them. 100% good. When I was getting into backpacking, I had been on a trip in very, very remote part of North Carolina. I didn't see anyone else on a trail for 5 days. This is one of my first real backpacking trips as an adult. On the 5th night, I was on the Appalachian Trail for 1 day. And when it came time to make camp, I did what I had been doing for the previous 5 days. I found a flat spot immediately adjacent to the trail, and I pitched my little tarp right there and started making myself dinner. About a half an hour later, a through hiker comes through, beard down to here, and he comes in very friendly into my camp. Hey, how's it going? We've been hiking all this, all that. And he says to me very politely, you might find that you'd have a little more privacy if you moved your campsite about 200 feet over that way. And I thought, wow, what a great idea. I won't be interrupted. And excellent. Of course, I get back to civilization. I'm introduced to Leave No Trace. And I went, oh my God, that was the absolute kindest and most wonderful way that we could have possibly ever have. He could have been so nasty to me. He could have said, what are you doing here? You're camped right next to the trail. You're breaking this rule and that rule. But as soon as he found out that I was relatively inexperienced, he was very patient with me. And I've tried to extend that as I teach. And I'm on the trail a ton. I see people doing irresponsible stuff all the time. I'm a guide. I'm not a ranger. I don't have any enforcement power. At best, I have education power. So I think the most important thing that I've taken out of Leave No Trace is not so much the actual principles of Leave No Trace, which are crucial, but I find that the people who are applying those principles and teaching them, they have the greatest impact. I just know that knowing my own personality type, being a contrarian, if somebody pushes me this way, I'm going to right back that way. And so the fact that, this guy was so kind to me, he'd been on trail for 6 months and he'd probably seen nightmarish behavior and still he had the patience. So I think when it comes to Leave No Trace, that's one thing that I always, it's a wonderful organization. They're like a lot of good organizations. Occasionally there's a little lack of patience with people who are getting started, not from the organization, but from some of the people who are teaching. But yeah, and that was my philosophical side of it. Heather, you're very well versed in this.
Yeah, I think I've it's hard to have a sort of very general conversation about Leave No Trace. In 3 minutes or less. But what I will say is one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot lately is that legal doesn't necessarily mean ethical. So there are lots of things that you can do. There are lots of things that either there's no regulation at all. So there's, who's to say maybe one day there will be a regulation. And then there are things that are definitely permitted. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're the best, most, you think, there's a company, a for-profit company that makes like paper towels and stuff. I know this is coming out of the blue. Called Seventh Generation. You've heard of Seventh Generation. You can go to the supermarket and buy Seventh Generation laundry detergent or whatever. That name came from the idea of considering, when you embark upon a course of action, considering the impact of that act on the next 7 generations. So not only you, not only your children, not only your grandchildren, but think through, if I do this, what's the impact going to be 7 generations down the road? And I think that that's a really nice framework. And then you can get into specifics. Do this, don't do that, approach it this way, not that way. But I think to think about, if I engage in foraging is legal, right? There's no especially on your own property. Foraging may be legal, but is it ethical? Is it wise? Is it going to result in what will be the impact in 7 generations? And I like to remind people about ginseng, which was ridiculously common in the Catskills even 30 or 40 years ago. And now it's really hard to ever find any. Passenger pigeons, they were so common. People would say, the skies would darken. Hello, Hockey. The skies would darken with, so many pigeons. And now they're extinct. And they're extinct directly because of human intervention. So, and it was about 7 generations from that level of God. There's millions. They're everywhere. They're plentiful to gone, extinct. So I like to use that as a kind of a rubric for like, I can, but should I? And it's not always Hockey shove off. It's not always the most fun to be ethical. So you have to rearrange how you think about it, and find other ways to really enjoy and have a fantastic experience. I take only photos and leave only footsteps, leave only footprints. I think that kind of sums it up. And in the days of pandemic awareness and how do we integrate outdoor recreation with virus reality, the first Leave No Trace guideline is plan ahead and be prepared. And all of a sudden, planning ahead means taking social distancing into account, sorry, do you hear the barking? They're playing. So taking that, not only do I have my map and compass, do I have warm clothing, but do I have my mask? Do I have gloves? Do I have an extra pencil? Do I have stuff that I'm going to use on the trail and then take with me? Do I have a good garbage bag that's easily accessible so that I won't be tempted to throw my mask or gloves on the ground?
Yeah. That idea. So when we initially had to notify majority of our hikers come from downstate, particularly New York City, when we had to suspend business a little bit before the state required that of us, I was instantly flooded with a number of requests. Okay, well, point me in a place to go hiking. Where should I go? Where can I go? To the point where we felt the need to address this in a blog post on our website. And what we talked about, if we're going to bring COVID into the Leave No Trace, we always emphasize that we're stewards of the land. And I said, we also have to be stewards of the communities that are up here as well. And that drove this home to a lot of people who didn't understand that. People who would never dream of damaging this environment that they love don't realize, like, oh, wait a minute, you mean I might be damaging the communities? The number of people that were shocked to hear that we don't have a hospital in Greene County.
Right.
It's a big thing. So I've been doing a lot of ruminating about this, about how Leave No Trace can really tie in very well to, applying those very good principles to how we behave with COVID. I love what you said about, now packed in your 10 essentials, like number 11 is mask and, all these additional things to come through. So.
Yeah. It's also just a new awareness. You used to leave the house. All right, I got my wallet, I got my cell phone, I got my keys, I'm good. And now the awareness is not only, okay, I need to make
Purell
sure,
bottle.
I have my mask, I have my gloves, I have hand sanitizer. And when I go out into the world, how many things do I touch? Oh my goodness, I did not realize I was so touchy, hands everywhere. So I'm really, it's a new way of thinking. And I would say, just remember, cut yourself a break in terms of the stress level and the exhaustion. Like I know people are saying, I don't understand why I'm so tired, why I'm so overwhelmed and I'm so tired. I didn't do that much. I walked around my neighborhood or whatever. I think a new awareness and a new way of thinking and trying to retrain your brain to take into account all this stuff you never thought about before is really draining.
Yeah.
True. That's a great thing to keep in mind.
We'll be right back.
Oh,
Bye, Dave.
Bye, Dave. Heather, I really loved what you said about us all being good stewards of the land, and just generally talking about the philosophy of leave no trace.
Yeah.
You and I were talking the other day about geotagging photos and how that's not technically a principle of leave no trace, but it still kind of ties in with the philosophy. And
right. Leave no trace. Maybe I think it might be as much as 2 years ago now. Leave no trace put out sort of an informal set of guidelines. They're not formally adopted as like they're a part of the official 7 principles, but they did put out some social media guidelines that I think are really useful. If you're not sure, how do I go about posting wonderful hike photos ethically? Leave no trace social media guidelines are a great place to start.
Yeah, there have been a couple hikes where we haven't exactly blindfolded people on the drive to the trailhead, but we have told them that we would frown very strongly upon them posting any pictures that would give away location. And it's not the idea of like, this is our special place and no one else can go to it. It's the idea that certain places truly are very vulnerable. I mean, we're looking in the Catskills, that this isn't like the Moab Desert. When we were working in Utah, it's basically do not step off the trail. You're going to crush hundreds of years worth of crypto. The Catskills are a little more resilient than that. But at the same time, there are some places that are very easily accessible that are very fragile. I mean, the Blue Hole is the best example of that, which remained unspoiled for years. And then, one social media thing. And it's certainly not the fault of anyone who's seeing that on social media. They see a beautiful place. They see other people are there. I want to go there. But there's not as much understanding of that. And I mean, there are a few places that I'd be horrified. I would love to share them with more people. But at the same time, I know like, well, if more than about 100 people come to this place a year, it's going to start to look a lot different.
Right. Olivia and I were talking about Blue Hole the other day. And what I was saying was, I feel certain that original post that started the whole blitz, that the person who posted that organization that posted that, had no intention of doing anything bad. They did not want to see the Blue Hole get overrun. They wanted to see it remain as beautiful as it was the day they made that post. That was the whole point. Look how beautiful this place is. Look how lovely it is. And so I think things can get away from us on social media, and we don't mean it. It's not about being bad. It's not about bad intentions. It's about not realizing that like success can have unintended consequences.
Well, that's a good note for us to end on, I think, for today. But it's wonderful talking with both of you. You guys are wealths of knowledge. I wish we could talk for another hour. I want to first thank Dave and Heather so much for participating. And thank you all for joining our live stream to ask questions today. If you enjoyed the stream, please consider signing up for our online mailing list on catskillcenter.org to get notified about more events. next Thursday at 4 p.m. On Instagram Live, you can join our Catskills Trivia to test your knowledge of the outdoors, the Catskills, and to leave no trace. And thank you all again for joining us. And this was fun. I hope we have a chance to do it again.
Thank you. It was fun for us too. I'm cold.
Go, Heather, get some warmth, some extra layers.
Well, it looks like spring's finally showing up. Hopefully we won't be cold for much longer.
From your lips.
I know.
And recreate local. Bye, guys. Have fun.
Thanks, Olivia. Thanks, Heather.
Stay safe.
You're also streaming, right? Now it turned off.